once again, this is going to be the final installment in our resin infusion for the custom clock we're making. Again, to catch you guys up, this is part 4. We've already done our layup. We're using very fancy magenta metal flake along with some beautiful half-inch chopped carbon fiber. Looks like so. Did our layup, did our setup for the bag, we did everything else. Last step of the process now is to actually run our infusion. I've already mixed the catalyst. I'm just letting it kind of degas for a few minutes so the bubbles all disappear before we run it, because any air that is in our cup is going to make it to the part, right? So pretty basic principle. I do have our vacuum manifold side elevated just a few inches. The resin system I'm using for this is 8101. This is a vinyl ester resin, and that is available from my friends over at Express Composites. This is a really, really nice low viscosity infusion resin. If you guys are looking for a good vinyl ester infusion resin, this is awesome. So this resin has about a 15-minute open window. And once it starts going off, it's going to go off really, really, really quick. The catalyst system that I'm using on this resin is a, oh, it's not even listed on here. It's called 925H. It's a wonderful, wonderful catalyst that it's called a snap cure catalyst. So it's going to stay open a lot longer than a standard MEKP 9. And again, once it starts going off, it's going to go off. So where most resin systems are, or most catalyst systems are kind of progressive, where they'll kind of gel up, this is going to stay open really long, and then it's going to spike and it's going to go off fast. So I'm going to turn my vacuum pump on here, and then we're going to shoot this infusion. And hopefully you guys get to see real time the resin magic flow across the parts. So trying to keep the pump noise down to a minimum. I have a muffler on it, so I apologize about the resin pump noise in the background. Cut our vacuum manifold side open. Remove our tape clamp here. And then it's going to be off to the races. And like I said, this is a very, very, very low viscosity resin. So it's going to shoot across at least the beginning fairly fast. And then it'll slow down once it probably reaches about halfway across. And I'll explain that, about why it does that in just a second here. So, there we go. We are off to the races. So in any vacuum infusion, you're basically taking a difference of atmospheric pressure, right? So in the very beginning of your infusion, there's a very, very big difference between the vacuum and the atmosphere. Once that resin pushes away across the part, the closer and closer it gets to the end of the part, the less of a pressure differential there is, because whatever resin's in the system is already at atmospheric pressure. That's obviously filling the part right now. You can see I don't have any weird little bubbles streaming across, so that means that our vacuum is really, really, really good. This is what I would call a medium resin speed infusion right now. And again, there's no flow mesh. This is just the Rovicore that we started out with. So it's a fantastic, fantastic flow medium. And there's nothing I can do right now except for watch it go. You know, it's kind of stressful because obviously there's a lot on the line. You want to make sure the part turns out as good as possible, but at this point there's really not a whole lot you can do. If your prep work was done right, then it should go smooth. If your prep work was not done right, then you got problems. But you can see that the resin feed side I have is very, very short on the spiral wrap. That's going to help dictate how fast this resin actually moves across the part. And I'm not looking for a lightning fast infusion. So if I had a lot of spiral wrap on this side, it it would feed that resin in and just completely cook across. Doing a little bit of a slower infusion helps wet out the fibers a little bit better. It's always a little nerve-wracking watching an infusion because, you know, obviously there's a lot on the line here. A lot of prep work has happened, and it's kind of up to the gods of resin right now to make sure everything goes good. But so far it's looking very, very, very good. You can see how even that resin front is moving across. Some epoxy resins are a little bit slower moving than this. Like I said, this is a fairly low viscosity resin vinyl ester, but we try to slow it down as much as we can with that short feed line. And what's going to happen here is you start to see the resin front finishing the infusion on the Rovicore or the carbon fiber area, right? So it's going to start bleeding across that peel ply just a little bit, and it's going to end up working its way to that vacuum manifold. Still got a pretty good amount of resin in the cup. You got to keep an eye on that. The last thing you want to do is run out of resin in your cup. So this is looking fantastic. Like I said, it's following that Rovicore perimeter, and then it's going to actually just force its way through that peel ply, and it will end up hitting that vacuum manifold eventually here. Still a pretty fast infusion for this size of a part. There you go. You can see it now hitting the resin break. So now there's not a lot of air in this little area between the fabric and the vacuum manifold. So the resin's working really, really, really hard, pushing from this side, pushing that resin against there, and it's going to just force its way through there. But it's going to take a lot longer to fill this extra 2 inches here than it did the whole rest of the part. But in theory, it should mostly fill this. We'll see how long it takes. I typically let my resin go off in the cup, so whatever we got in the cup here eventually will gel up. Right now it's still very, very liquid stage. Once it starts to gel, that's kind of the time where you want to clamp the line off. Anything that's in the part is going to kind of keep doing its own thing, but anything that is in the cup is going to go off a little bit quicker. Like I said, we still have a lot of liquid in there right now, so you guys will be able to see what happens when that starts to gel up, and it'll gel up pretty quick when it actually does start to gel up. But there's that resin break. You can see that resin just slowly forcing its way through that peel ply on its way to the vacuum manifold. And it doesn't necessarily have to hit the vacuum manifold. It doesn't have to necessarily slam into it. You know, there's a couple different schools of thought about that, but I've never had an issue as long as you have a nice resin break at the end of the part. As long as that resin has something where it's going to hit and force its way through there, you're going to get a good part no matter what. And it's getting there. It's creeping. You know, you can see it just barely creeping its way through that peel ply there. It'll get there. It'll get there. You're kind of letting physics doing the work here, you know what I mean? You got there we go. It's just starting to hit that vacuum manifold. And that vacuum manifold will fill up with resin eventually. And if it does hit that vacuum manifold, this vacuum manifold, like I said, will allow air to pass through, but it does not allow resin to pass through. So once it hits that, it basically creates a barrier and it stops. That is exactly what we're looking for. That is exactly what we're hoping for. You can barely see